I've been working really hard to get back to full health, and I feel like probably over these last couple of weeks is when I've probably started feeling my best. Obviously, my ankle kind of.
The moment she was drafted, everybody believed the franchise had finally found its savior. But absolutely nobody could have anticipated that the most hyped rookie in the history of basketball would be secretly planning her exit just a few months into her professional journey. Fans began picking up on the warning signs, the eye rolls, the visible frustration, and the completely detached body language she was displaying on the floor. Music. But the real drama was unfolding in places the cameras were never allowed to go. Stories have been leaking out of the locker room about a relationship so broken, so completely shattered, that it has triggered one of the most jaw-dropping power struggles this league has ever witnessed. It began as the ultimate fairy tale, a once-in-a-generation talent arriving to lift a struggling franchise toward championship glory. Music. But it rapidly collapsed into a poisonous atmosphere filled with clashing personalities, alleged punishments, and a coaching staff that appeared hopelessly unequipped to handle the phenomenon they had just been handed. People anticipated some friction, but nobody expected full-scale warfare between a franchise cornerstone and the very people assigned to develop her. The tension has now escalated to an absolutely unbearable level, and the rumors circulating throughout the league suggest that a fiery ultimatum has already been placed directly in front of the front office. But to truly understand how everything unraveled so spectacularly, so devastatingly fast, you have to go back to the very first seconds she laced up her sneakers in a professional uniform. Indiana was supposed to represent the perfect basketball sanctuary. Music, a place where a Midwest-born prodigy could seamlessly evolve into the ultimate professional superstar. Instead, the cold reality of the situation crashed down like a wrecking ball, revealing Music, a deeply embedded organizational dysfunction that no amount of packed arenas or sellout crowds could possibly conceal. The level of attention surrounding her debut was completely without precedent. Music, bringing private charter flights, blockbuster television contracts, and a degree of worldwide scrutiny the league had simply never encountered in its entire existence. Any reasonable person would assume that a franchise handed this kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity would exhaust every possible resource to accommodate her talents, shield her from every threat, and construct a system specifically designed to let her immediately flourish. But what unfolded on national broadcasts week after agonizing week was the complete and total opposite. It was a textbook case of mismanagement, a disturbing exhibition of a conventional coaching staff desperately attempting to squeeze a revolutionary player into a stale, suffocating framework. The friction wasn't simply a minor inconvenience or a temporary adjustment period. It was a fundamental collision of basketball philosophies that threatened to destroy the most valuable career the sport had ever produced before it even had a real chance to breathe. Music, and the earliest warning signs of this disastrous breakdown didn't originate inside the playbook. They started with how the organization responded when their marquee player was physically targeted night after night on the court. The jump from college basketball to the professional level is always a brutal awakening, but the physical punishment inflicted on this particular rookie was something Music, entirely beyond the norm, and it exposed a glaring, inexcusable failure within the team's leadership structure. Opposing rosters weren't simply playing with intensity or competitive edge. Music, they were delivering a deliberate message, deploying suffocating traps, punishing fouls, and relentless full-court harassment designed to break the newcomer mentally and physically. Veteran players across the league felt genuinely disrespected by the overwhelming media spectacle surrounding her arrival. Music, and they channeled every drop of that bitterness directly into her ribs, her ankles, and her jaw on a nightly basis. Every single person watching fully expected her teammates to surround her, to establish a culture of protection, and to make it crystal clear that attacking Music, their star player, would come with serious consequences. In virtually any other professional sport, taking a cheap shot at the franchise player means the entire bench empties immediately, Music, to ensure it never happens again. Instead, Music, audiences were left completely stunned by the coaching staff's shockingly passive response to the nightly abuse. When blatantly dirty contact occurred, the head coach was frequently spotted standing with her arms folded, delivering zero passionate defense, zero screaming at referees, and zero tactical countermeasures to punish the teams exploiting her. There were incidents where she was openly thrown to the floor well after the referee's whistle had blown, and the sideline didn't flinch. Post-game press conferences turned unbearably uncomfortable, with organizational leadership recycling hollow talking points about needing to display more toughness, quietly placing the burden of blame on the rookie for not adjusting fast enough to professional-level physicality. This total absence of vocal, visible support registered as a profound betrayal to a player who had grown up inside a program built entirely on mutual loyalty, music, and aggressive protection of its own. The failure to defend her wasn't exclusively a physical problem. It was a deeply psychological wound that planted the earliest and most stubborn seeds of genuine resentment. Music. She was absorbing punishment on behalf of the entire league's financial machine, soaking up the envy and hostility of hardened veterans. Music, while glancing over at a sideline that appeared completely unmoved by everything she was enduring. But the physical beating she was absorbing was merely the surface layer, because a far more profound and systemic crisis was quietly developing every single time they ran an offensive set in practice or in a game. Music. The true breaking point lived inside the playbook, where two completely incompatible basketball philosophies crashed into each other with catastrophic force. On one side stood a revolutionary guard whose entire identity was rooted in explosive transition basketball, deep pull-up threes, and a freewheeling offensive system that placed absolute trust in her extraordinary court vision and her unscripted creative genius. She didn't merely participate in the game, she bent it entirely to her will, identifying passing windows and scoring opportunities that nobody else standing in that arena could even begin to process. On the opposite side stood a head coach deeply anchored in an old-fashioned, grind-heavy, music, defensively obsessed system that demanded methodical half-court execution and ironclad structural discipline. Music. It was the equivalent of dropping a Formula One engine into a farm tractor and scratching your head over why it wasn't dominating the circuit. Music. Game after game, spectators watched in utter disbelief as the offense curdled into a stagnant, lifeless operation with the ball being systematically stripped from the rookie's hands during the possessions that mattered most. Music, play designs being signaled from the sideline looked deliberately engineered to contain her rather than liberate her, producing infuriating stretches where she was planted in the corner as nothing more than a decoy while far less efficient teammates launched ill-advised shots. The frustration became completely impossible to conceal, spilling out through raised hands, furiously shaking heads, and stone-cold glares fired directly at the bench after every broken possession. Basketball analysts began surgically dismantling the coaching strategy on national television, hammering home the point that the staff was categorically failing to weaponize the greatest offensive talent they had ever been trusted with. Every single time the pace began to accelerate and the rookie attempted to push the tempo into overdrive, a timeout would materialize out of nowhere, killing the momentum entirely just to diagram a lumbering, embarrassingly predictable half-court set. The disconnect was impossible to ignore, and it was only a question of when, not if, the simmering silent frustration would finally erupt into loud, public outrage. She wasn't simply navigating the normal growing pains of a rookie season. She was being systematically suffocated, her most elite and marketable qualities deliberately suppressed by the very organization that was supposed to be maximizing them. And what began unfolding behind closed doors in the aftermath would permanently alter the direction of the entire season and push an already fractured relationship completely beyond the point of repair. Reports started seeping out from inside the organization that film sessions and private meetings had devolved into extraordinarily tense confrontations. The rookie, universally celebrated for her freakishly advanced basketball intelligence, allegedly stopped swallowing her frustration and began challenging the absence of offensive adjustments directly to the coaching staff's faces. Sources close to the situation whispered about explosive exchanges where she methodically outlined the devastating holes in their spacing concepts, music, the embarrassing predictability of their set plays, and the fundamental absurdity of running a slow, grinded-out offense with a roster constructed to play at a breakneck pace. Challenging a professional head coach is one of the most dangerous moves, music, any rookie can make, but this was not an ordinary rookie by any definition of the word. This was the singular player shouldering the entire financial weight of a booming league on her back. She recognized that the offense was fundamentally broken. She understood that every fan in every arena could see it too, and she allegedly stepped forward demanding more sophisticated schemes that didn't consistently leave her trapped inside suffocating double teams with absolutely nowhere to go with the basketball. She was being subjected to full-court blitzes and face-guarding assignments that stretched all 94 feet of the floor, and the coaching staff was offering precisely zero tactical solutions to alleviate the pressure. No screens were being designed to shake her loose. No off-ball movement was being choreographed to make opposing teams pay for their aggressive trapping schemes. Music. and she was essentially being handed a one-way ticket to figure out the impossible on her own against the most elite defensive players on the planet. For a coaching staff laser-focused on cementing their authority and demonstrating organizational control, this level of tactical questioning and outright pushback landed as a devastating blow directly to their pride. Rather than absorbing the feedback with professionalism, evolving the playbook accordingly, and entering a genuine collaborative dialogue with their generational floor general, leadership allegedly chose to interpret the conversation as a direct assault on their power structure. They became consumed with proving that their system carried more weight than any single individual, manufacturing a suffocating power struggle where protecting fragile egos became a far greater priority than actually winning basketball games. The coaching staff concluded that a definitive statement needed to be made to reclaim command of the locker room, and that conclusion led to a deeply controversial decision that would ultimately break the internet in half and ignite a media firestorm of truly historic proportions. Fans and analysts across the country were left completely stupefied when the undisputed best player on the roster began having her minutes inexplicably strangled during the most pivotal moments of tightly contested games. Camouflaged beneath laughably thin justifications involving foul music trouble, vague fatigue concerns, or questionable defensive matchup excuses, the coaching staff began systematically benching their franchise cornerstone at precisely the moment she was most desperately needed. There were games where the entire offensive operation ground to a complete standstill in the fourth quarter, the team hemorrhaging a lead and screaming for someone to step up and deliver. Yet the broadcast camera would drift over to the bench and land on the franchise player sitting there motionless, a towel draped across her shoulders, her expression radiating pure, barely contained fury. She would fix her eyes on the hardwood, jaw tight, projecting a level of competitive rage so intense it practically burned through the television screen into living rooms across the country. This was not strategic rest. This was not responsible load management. Every credible insider who weighed in speculated that this was a coldly calculated punitive maneuver designed to deliver an unmistakable reminder to the rookie about exactly who held the keys to the kingdom. It was a textbook old-school coaching power play, benching the most important player on the roster to hammer home a message about compliance, defensive accountability, and unconditional system loyalty. But attempting to publicly discipline a generational icon in front of an audience of millions of deeply passionate, emotionally invested fans backfired in the most catastrophically spectacular fashion imaginable. Social media detonated with raw, unfiltered outrage, with enormous waves of supporters demanding the coach's immediate termination, while the players' inner circle sat back in composed silence and watched the stunning public disrespect play out on every major broadcast platform. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of benching the one human being personally responsible for selling out arenas from coast to coast betrayed a level of organizational tone-deafness that was genuinely difficult to comprehend. It was a humiliation delivered not just to the player herself, but to the millions of devoted fans who had spent enormous sums of money on tickets specifically to witness her brilliance, only to find her surgically removed from the game's most critical moments because of a petty, ego-driven power struggle. The optics were catastrophically bad, feeding an insatiable daily media circus where sports talk programs spent every hour obsessively dissecting each substitution pattern, music, every timeout decision, and every visible flash of frustration visible on the sideline. But the poisonous tension refused to stay contained between the coach and the star player. It bled rapidly into the rest of the locker room, manufacturing a deeply toxic and profoundly uncomfortable atmosphere for every single person suiting up in that jersey. The environment inside the locker room allegedly transformed into something barely functional, a quiet, suffocating divide that forced teammates to tiptoe through their daily routines on a bed of broken glass. The veteran players discovered themselves locked inside an utterly impossible and fundamentally unfair situation, pinned in a brutal tug-of-war between a traditional old-school coach demanding total submission and a visionary teammate who demonstrably understood the game at a level the entire coaching staff simply could not match. During media availability sessions, the tension hanging over the room was so suffocating it could have been sliced clean through with a blade. Whenever reporters pressed teammates about the increasingly controversial coaching decisions, the sputtering offensive production, or the flagrant physical abuse being directed at the rookie night after night, the responses that came back were buttoned up, riddled with uncomfortable stretches of silence, and stuffed with hollow PR-approved talking points that communicated absolutely nothing of substance. Nobody was willing to openly revolt against the coach who possessed complete control over their playing time and professional futures, but nobody was eager to throw shade at the superstar who was quite literally amplifying their personal brands, securing them seats on charter flights, and funding their livelihoods through the staggering wave of new revenue she was single-handedly generating for the league. This glaring absence of any unified team front only pushed the rookie deeper into isolation, reinforcing the painful feeling that she was waging a completely solitary war against an organization that was fundamentally unqualified to steward someone operating at her extraordinary level. Music. Reports suggested she felt entirely and utterly alone inside a building that was supposed to represent her professional home, encircled by a coaching staff that quietly resented the scale of her unprecedented celebrity and surrounded by teammates too paralyzed by the fear of professional consequences to stand up and say anything in her corner. It was a psychological pressure cooker of the cruelest variety, simultaneously absorbing the crushing expectations of the entire sports universe while fighting an internal civil war inside the very walls of her own practice facility. The pure, radiant joy that had become the defining signature of her college career, that magnetic smile and irresistible swagger that had captured the hearts of millions, was visibly evaporating with every passing week. Music, replaced by a hardened, weathered shell belonging to someone who had come to the sobering realization that they were entrenched inside a deeply broken system with no easy way out. This devastating psychological isolation became the final breaking point, quietly setting into motion a high-stakes behind-the-scenes power play that currently has the entire professional basketball world holding its collective breath, music, and scrambling to prepare for whatever explosive fallout comes next. Operating entirely out of the public's view, the players' enormously powerful and well-connected representation allegedly inserted themselves into the equation, concluding that their client's long-term career arc, mental and emotional well-being, and nine-figure global brand simply could not sustain being permanently anchored to a suffocating, incompetent organizational environment. Devastating whispers of a formal ultimatum began reverberating through the highest corridors of the franchise's front office, completely bypassing the coaching staff and traveling directly to the ownership level. The message being delivered was reportedly as clear and sharp as a scalpel. Either sweeping, fundamental changes are immediately made to the coaching staff and the entire offensive philosophy, or the franchise faces the very real and very terrifying prospect of losing the single greatest commercial draw the sport has ever produced the moment she gains the contractual freedom to engineer her own departure. The leverage she commands is absolutely staggering in its scale and entirely without precedent for a player still music in the opening chapter of her professional career in any major sports league on earth. She is not simply selling tickets to basketball games. She is single-handedly manufacturing record-shattering television ratings, triggering seismic spikes in merchandise revenue across every market, and orchestrating a wholesale revitalization of the surrounding local economy on every single game night. Music. The bars, the restaurants, and the hotels clustered around the arena have built their entire business models around her presence and her pulling power. The league's landmark upcoming television rights negotiations are resting enormous financial expectations squarely on her continued ability to attract historic viewership numbers. If she were to formally submit a trade request, or even float the credible threat of sitting out or taking her talents to a richly compensated overseas or alternative professional league, the financial destruction visited upon the franchise would be nothing short of catastrophic. Music, plunging the entire organization back into the cold, suffocating darkness of irrelevance overnight and leaving behind almost nothing of what her arrival had constructed. Ownership is now allegedly operating in a state of barely managed absolute panic, wedged impossibly between swallowing their pride and acknowledging their catastrophic organizational error by relieving a coach they had recently and publicly committed to, or stubbornly holding the line and gambling everything on the permanent alienation of the most valuable asset professional basketball has ever seen. The general manager responsible for assembling the current roster is absorbing immense, suffocating pressure from every conceivable direction, slowly reckoning with a humbling truth that conventional team-building wisdom and standard organizational protocols simply cease to apply the moment you are fortunate enough to draft a full-blown cultural movement. You do not sit down with music, a player of this magnitude, and politely ask her to conform to your existing culture. You tear the existing culture down to its foundation and rebuild every single brick of it around the player. Rival general managers stationed around the rest of the league are reportedly watching the spectacular unraveling unfold in real time with enormous, barely concealed grins, quietly crunching salary cap numbers and assembling historically ambitious trade packages on standby, fully prepared to pounce the moment the situation completely detonates and she makes her desire to leave official. The league has never once witnessed a rookie command this magnitude of organizational leverage and institutional power. But it has also never once witnessed a rookie subjected to such a baffling, almost incomprehensible level of disrespect by the very people who were supposed to protect and nurture her. The The situation has metastasized to a critical mass where superficial apologies and cosmetic tweaks to the offensive game plan are no longer remotely sufficient to stabilize anything. The trust that once theoretically existed between the point guard and the sideline has been ground to absolute dust. Body language experts appearing on television programs to forensically analyze her interactions with the head coach highlight that there is zero meaningful eye contact, music, zero genuine collaborative communication, and an arctic emotional distance between them that communicates entire volumes without a single word being spoken. When a timeout is called in the present moment, she frequently gravitates to the outer edge of the huddle, eyes fixed blankly on the hardwood, while the coach frantically diagrams another elaborate play on the whiteboard, music that every single person standing inside that circle already knows is going to collapse into dysfunction within the first 5 seconds of execution. The fans filling the arena have completely turned as well, showering their own coaching staff with thunderous, unforgiving boos during head-scratching substitutions and erupting into passionate chants of the rookie's name whenever she is inexplicably anchored to the bench during the game's most decisive moments. It has metastasized into a deeply toxic and almost surreal public spectacle, a prime-time reality television drama playing itself out on a professional basketball court. Music, and the raw psychological and emotional toll it is extracting from the young star is becoming increasingly impossible to overlook or explain away. The exhaustion is etched into her face during post-game press conferences, where she delivers clipped, surgically rehearsed responses designed to avoid generating yet another round of damaging headlines, white-knuckling the microphone as she fights with everything she has to keep her authentic, boiling frustration from cracking through the carefully constructed surface. The assembled media in those rooms fully recognizes the magnitude of the powder keg they are gathered around, relentlessly searching for that single unguarded quote, music, that will detonate the entire situation and send shockwaves reverberating through every corner of the sports world. She has managed the suffocating weight of this pressure with a level of composure and grace that is frankly astonishing for someone operating at her stage of life and career, but every human being on this earth carries a breaking point somewhere, and every credible rumor circulating suggests she is standing on the absolute razor's edge of hers. The front office is painfully aware that the clock ticking above their heads is accelerating rapidly, and they understand with complete clarity that the entire basketball universe is scrutinizing their every decision, their every word, and their every move. They are no longer simply managing the operations of a professional basketball team.